The next set of adjustments are in this effects tab here. You have clarity, which increases the sort of contrast and the sharpness of your image. So for this image, if I drag it all the way to the right, you see all of the details in the leaves in the sky. You get more stars in the sky that you didn't see when this was off. Dragging to the left softens everything, which can help a little bit with skin for portraits to make things a little softer. If I go to the photo of me, let's go just going to the right. There we go. If we increase clarity, you start to see all of those details of my face, and it gets really grungy, which I don't like necessarily. So softening it up can give you a nice sort of portrait dreamy style. Let's undo that. Let's go to this photo again and show you what dehaze does. So dehaze is a way that if you're shooting a photo of a hazy sky, you can pull out more of that detail. It also works here with this image, similar, not technically, but sort of how a polarizing filter works. It adds a little bit of contrast. It adds a little bit of saturation to things like skies. Dragging to the left will make things a little bit cloudy and foggy. Let's go to this image. Let's go to this last image here, or this one here, dragging up the dehaze. Now this is a JPEG image, so we don't have as much information to edit with, but as you can see here, dragging up the dehaze brings out a lot of more details in the sky. All right, so let's go here. We have our vignette options, which is another effect. Dragging to the right will create a white vignette. To the left, a dark vignette. If we click this arrow to drop down our options, we can see that there is a feathering option that increases or decreases the feathering, making the edge of this vignette harder or softer. The midpoint makes it basically bigger or smaller. Dragging to the right increases the size of the vignette, or the circle dragging to the left will make it smaller. And then the roundness, you can make it more of a square or a circular vignette. If you want sort of a more stylistic sort of like framing like that, you can drag the feathering, midpoint, roundness to the left, and the vignette all the way to the left. Maybe we don't want feathering. You've got this nice hard border now, or a white one. Drag all the way to the right. So now what highlights does, let's increase our roundness, something like this, increase our feathering. So what highlights does is it allows highlights to come through the vignette to look a little bit more natural. So see in the top left how those highlights start to come through. If we increase this highlight slider, that's just allowing the brighter parts of your image to come through the vignette. So let's reset. What I typically like to do is add a little bit of a vignette, definitely feather, reset our roundness. And I like to have something very subtle. The reason you would add a vignette is to increase the attention on what's in the middle of your frame. Now with this image, I usually don't like adding a white vignette, but for this one, it kind of works. I don't always like to add vignettes though. I feel like it's definitely a stylistic choice that's great for portraits, but for things like landscapes, it generally doesn't work as well, at least in my opinion. Lastly, we have the grain slider. Increasing the grain gives it sort of that green, it just adds grain to it, so it gives it that style. This can work better when you're doing a black and white photo. So if I drop my saturation all the way down, maybe I drop the exposure down a little bit too, you can see that grain adds that sort of effect. There are more options under this grain menu, increasing the size of the grain and the roughness, making it a little bit smoother or less smooth. So going to the left makes it a little smoother, to the right a little bit more blocky and contrasty. But as I do this, you can see that it starts to make my photo a little blurred out. So dragging the roughness to the left and increasing the size might not be the best option. It's definitely a stylistic choice. I usually don't add grain unless it's going for that specific style. So that's the effects here. We have one more effect, which is split toning, which we'll look at in the next lesson.